So today, what am I going to do? Well, just welcome you first. So welcome to the IndyPod Summit. This is an event all about celebrating independent podcasters and the unique work that they do. That's everything from, a brand new interview show on knitting or surfing or AI or, just starting the journey, right up to the biggest independent shows out there that might be attracting 6 or 7 figure audiences and building a big business around all of the value they give their audience. Those smaller shows, though, they're the lifeblood of the industry. They're the ones that provide that crazily niche, completely personal content that podcasting is just so brilliant for. It's the quilter speaking to 100 loyal listeners, or the mountain runner sharing route plans for just a few hundred locals, the gamer speaking to, 1,000 true fans of some weird cult Nintendo classic. That's who we're celebrating here and who we want to make sure gets supported in our industry for the long term. Because that's the thing, it's easy for an industry to get lost in what, the networks need, what the big media players are demanding, and forgetting about those little shows. Tools then get built for enterprise and services get created for those with huge budgets because those places are where those big budgets are. But how do we make sure the independent shows still get heard? Now, that's part of our big goal here because it's about figuring out what problems those individual shows face, whether it's right at the start of their journey, what gets in the way of starting that show, what gets in the way of keeping it going week in, week out. But it's also about figuring out what problems they face later in their journey. Why aren't they achieving the goals they set at the start? What do they struggle with in earning a living? How do they struggle in growing their audience? We've always held a ton of these voices through the people that visit our content over at thepodcasthost.com. Those voices, those questions, that's what powers our content, really. We listen out for the questions and then we write blog posts, we make podcast episodes, we make videos to answer them. It all comes from those voices. Even the product we created, Alitu, our podcast maker, that was built around the biggest question we always got, which was around editing. People coming to us and saying, what's EQ? How do I add music? How do I make it so that editing doesn't take over my entire life? Plus all of the other pains, of course, and that's adding in recording and hosting in recent years to Alitu too, to try and conquer those barriers as well. So that's what the census was all about. It was getting a bigger picture of who the independent podcaster is, how they think about podcasting, what problems they really struggle with, and what they want from the industry. So that's part of what I'll get into over the next half hour to kick off this event. We closed the census last week. So first, I'm going to share a wee look at the data. It's a sneak peek on some of the trends, some of the numbers, and the initial things we're pulling out of it. Then we'll publish the full analysis of that in March with a big breakdown of all the trends that we found. Then after that, this morning, today, I'm going to go through into a few of the trends that I see coming up this year related to indie podcasting. I know it's always a bit of a fool's errand to try and make predictions, but there's a few things I think it's useful for everyone out there to have in your mind over the coming year. And I want to share a few of them. And then we're going to have time for questions and discussion. And I want this all to be a dialogue. We want to hear your thoughts all through the day. So after I finish up here, I want to know from you, what are the big barriers for you? What trends do you see coming? What do you want to see happen in podcasting? So we've got most of an hour, so we can use as much of that time as we need, and then we can go to the breakout rooms for the rest. And then we'll jump into a panel session right after with some really amazing folks from the podcast industry, hear what they think are the most important things we need to keep in mind through the next 12 months. It's just really cool to get to this point running this event. So I just want to say thanks to my team at the front for all the work they've done on it. It's both to collect such a brilliant set of data. It's one of the biggest of its type in the industry, but also in organizing such a great collection of speakers today. There's some really exceptional people here doing great things. So I'm really looking forward to actually watching a bunch of the sessions too. So thanks again to Sean, Becca, and Jacob in particular for leading it, and for the whole rest of our team at the Podcast Host and Alitu for supporting it all. So let's get into the data. Right, so in the census, just to give you a quick idea of the timeline, we put out the census back in November, and it ran through December and most of January as well. So we're presenting the results, the sort of initial results just now. And then the final results will come out in March. So a few things on it. It's the first research study specifically targeted at independent podcasters. We ended up with, and I'll nip on to the next slide for the actual data, we ended up with 1,258 respondents, which is brilliant. So many people in there, so that's absolutely brilliant. 21 data points as well in terms of questions, and we had 10 partners involved too. So we really want to thank all of those partners for helping us gather all of this data. And of course, 830 people signed up for the summit, which actually grew before the end of the summit, before the end of the census as well. So that includes all of you guys here who are out there watching. So let's get into some of the data in the first place. First, looking at gender and participation. So great to see a good balance of gender there. Oh, just nip back there. Great to see a good balance on gender there. We can see a really nice balance there in the first place. In terms of partner responses, you can see that a good bit of the data comes from our audience, so 57%, so a bit over half. That's people who visit thepodcasthost.com. We ran an invite to the census on the site there and shared it with our email subscribers too. But you can see that nearly half, so 43%, comes from other sources. That's what we're looking for. And we hope to expand that in future, get even more from other sources as well. So we want to make this data as diverse as we can. We work to do as much of that as we can this time, but certainly we can do even more in future to make that more representative. Similarly, on ethnicity, here's where a fair bit of our audience bias might show. You can see that white, Caucasian, very overrepresented. In future, we'll be working even harder to balance this out. And in particular, we don't have good enough partners right now with communities or outlets across the whole of Asia. So this almost certainly isn't representative of that area. Definitely someone will be improving next time around. I just spotted today, actually, that James from Pod News started a series on this with Guangjin Yo, which is great to see. So we'll be reaching out to them to see if there's a way to get more data from that side as well. In terms of location, similarly, quite highly represented in North America and Europe, of course, and other areas less so. So again, a limitation on the data, but another thing we're going to work on hard for next time around. In age, this surprised me a little bit. Our data on the podcast host, our demographics that come to our main site, actually tends to skew much younger. So great to see lots of people in the older age. Not that I would say 40 plus is older, of course. Use truly included in there, but good to see that area of the age bracket quite well represented here. So we're going to be able to dig in and do a lot of cross-referencing where we look at the rest of the data related to what age groups people are in, what demographics people are in. That's all the kind of cross-referencing and segmenting we'll be able to do with this data when we put the full report out in March. Now, podcast experience, great to see this here too, a very good balance. We've got nearly half at 47%, are 50 episodes in at least, so very experienced. And then the other half, we have maybe around a quarter or so early stage, and then 10, 11, 12%, what's that, 11% plus 2, which are very early, either haven't launched or in their first episode or so. So great to see that kind of spread of experience too. All the data represents everyone from beginners right up to experienced podcasters. So jumping into some of the bigger questions here, we asked, do people want more feedback? One of the areas where we're interested in. And of course, we do as podcasters. One of the weaknesses of podcasting, obviously, is the kind of one-way nature of it. I'll talk a bit more about this later, actually, in my trends before we finish up. But quite clear that podcasters want more feedback, even if it is criticism. 81% needing that feedback. Podcast format, nice to see this too. Used to be in the olden days that it was all interview shows, but now interview shows down to nearly only a third at 38%, whereas solo shows becoming much more popular. There's probably a good workflow element in there. People wanting to run solo shows because they're just far easier to run, far more control over your content as well. But there's lots of other in there too. I love to see a good co-hosted show, often the best type of show in terms of, dynamics between the co-hosts, getting to know the two people really well. So it's great to see that as well. Crowding out the kind of old school, used to be all interview shows because people would perceive it as the easiest way to get into it. Again, we'll be able to use this as a dimension looking at the other data, whether interview shows see something and solo shows see another thing. So it'd be great to see that once we break it down and segment it. Now, video, something that has been really in the news, in trend over the last year or two. And so some really interesting data here. For a start, digging into kind of the current hype around it. I mean, just to preface this, anyone who listens to our show Podcraft know that Matthew and I have a few reservations about certain types of video in podcasting, and particularly around the growing narrative that you need to use video in podcasting from some corners of the industry. But I think that there's so many ways that we can use video really well as well. So it's great to see the data here. The data shows that we've got 46% of people who never use video and don't plan to. That's the 32 here on the left that don't record. And then the 14 who use it to see their other people on the call, but don't publish any of it. Then we've got 24% who plan to use video, but don't yet. I mean, that could show a barrier there. Is it too difficult right now, too costly? Or is it a perception that they should be doing video, but they just haven't got around to it yet or aren't that keen on it? Then we've got 21% using video as a marketing tool, which I think is a really good use of it in podcasting, stuff like highlight clips, trailers, and the like. But equally, 20% of podcasters publishing full episodes in video. That's a big number. So it's certainly a big active sector of our industry. I'm looking forward to digging deeper into this, combining with some of the other questions to see how video usage varies by, podcast type, by demographic, by the purpose of the podcast. I think that'll give us a much better insight behind the hype into really who will be using video in podcasting and how they want to be using it. Podcast spending is an interesting one here. I'm not sure if that's surprising or not, because I think a lot of podcasters are kind of gear junkies, software junkies. So is it surprising to know that 40%, not far off half, spend more than $500 on their podcasts, and 18% spend $1,000+? That seems like a lot of money, but, we do like our gear. Software is close, a little bit behind, but skewing a little bit towards the lower budget area. But we do have the majority there, people spending somewhere around $150 to $500. That's a third of all podcasters in that bracket. Now, service usage, great to see this here. A big coincidence there that they matched literally to the point percentage, the percentage point, I should say, on recording video and transcriptions. But lovely to see transcriptions in there, people using that to make their shows more accessible, to put out more written content that supports their podcast. I love to see that. And the fact that 12% of people, 1 in 10 podcasters, buying educational content around their podcast. It shows a real sector of podcasters who are, really putting time into their personal development, increasing their podcasting skills. Podcast expenditure, service usage. Now we go to podcasting challenges. So what are the biggest challenges in podcasting for independent podcasters? This didn't surprise me too much in terms of the most. Editing taking too long. It's the one that we've always heard when we're helping people with podcasting. So editing, still something that people struggle with, taking too long. Planning episodes, though, the second there. How do we help people with planning their episodes? There's many things that we do in terms of writing content on the podcast host, but there's certainly opportunity for tools, for systems, for techniques around that. Maybe we can help. And then in third place, of course, you've got copywriting. That's show notes and the like. Show notes are always the bane of any podcaster, the thing you do not want to do after you've done your recording. But there's so many benefits to having good show notes, both from a search point of view, having that text material online, and for supporting your listeners, helping them have something to go and see and review and see your content again afterwards. So there's loads of reasons to do that. And then some really interesting ones there, booking guests, topic ideation, another editing one, showing editing really is the issue. And hardware, a decent bit down the list, which is good. It means microphones and the like are getting a bit easier to use, maybe work better with computers. So that's great. And the final one there, an interesting one, clicking publish. It's that fear of going live. So I think there's other things we can do as well to celebrate that, to make it easier for people to hit it and put it out there and make their content live. This is a little word map of a lot of those issues in terms of problems. People would type in their own, whether it's in the other category or this is kind of a representation of what comes up in a lot. You can see that finding and listeners and audience is another one there as well. So that's one that maybe wasn't represented in that graph in terms of growing your audience. Yeah, it's not on there, but it's just because probably people would state it in lots of different ways. So we'll be doing a bit of analysis around that, maybe segmenting, theming these, and really pulling out all of the different themes. And I have a feeling going by this, that growing an audience is one of the big ones in there too. Just seeing them, some of those words standing out. Now, money to invest, an interesting one that came up. If you were going to spend money on your podcast, where would you put it? And probably reflecting that difficulty around editing and the like pretty well. Outsourcing is the biggest one. So being able to ask somebody else to edit your show, to publish your show, to put it all together for you. Still, obviously, a lot of people looking to upgrade their hardware as well, though. A good number of people there. And lovely to see, again, people wanting to invest in education to increase their skills. Good to see as well. I think that shows how seriously independent podcasters take podcasting. They're willing to spend money, their own hard-earned money, on increasing their skills, on getting better at what they do. So observations, again, just to highlight that we actively sought to make it as inclusive as we could. But again, we are going to work harder on that for next year. We did get submissions from all 6 continents, but there's certainly work we can do to make it even more representative of some of the other continents outside of Europe and the US, particularly Asia, Africa, and South America. All right. Let's get into then the trends that I see coming up for 2023. There's 4 things I want to talk through. And then we'll jump into the Q&A. So please do, if you have any questions on that data that we just put out there, pop it into the Q&A section within the app here, and we'll go through them. And equally, you can do the same with the trends as well. But once we've done that in the Q&A and the discussion, I'd love to hear if you have any trends that you see coming, anything you think that the industry should be doing so that we can make sure we're representing your voice and getting it out there. And then during the panel that comes straight after this, we'll be discussing that with another 3 or 4 experts from the industry as well. Okay, first trend I see is an increasing ability to be successfully independent. I mean, this past year has been pretty tough economically. I think there's probably no denying that in most sectors. Obviously, tech as a whole has seen huge layoffs, and that's all dripped into media companies as well. So I have no doubt that this coming year we'll see even more belt tightening. I mean, specifically on that, there's no real positive spin to that. It just sucks. But there is some potential that we could see some really great content come out of this. Because I think that there's just so much opportunity for many of those people to get away from bigger networks, to get away from bigger shows, and really just showcase their own personal voice and their own uniqueness. And a really good example of this I listened to just recently was a show called Shameless Acquisition Target. At one point, the host, Laura Meyer, she specifically talked about that how that show gave her the ability to be her, true self. It was a real voice, a real personality, compared to when she worked for bigger networks and companies in the past. There's no doubt that's always been a unique strength of podcasting. Nothing else has the same ability to be so transparent, so unique, and build a ridiculously loyal following around the most niche of subjects. The closest to that, in my opinion, is email, which is a funny comparison, I know, but it's really hard to write in a way that truly engages people. Obviously, there's people that can do that, and they're the ones who moved to Substack over the past year, 2 years, and developed really zealous, loyal audiences and are making a living there. I think we'll see that accelerate in podcasting too. More producers from the big networks, big agencies, big media companies striking out on their own and using that new freedom to create super imaginative, really creative content. And I think we'll see a ton of unexpected hits during 2023, much more so than we have in the last few years because of that. Number 2 is, I think that equally will lead to a change of advertising too. at last. I think ad spend will drop in a tough economy. Ad companies will want a better bang from their and companies will want a better bang from their buck. And who better to provide that bang than indie podcasters with really active, loyal, targeted audiences? I mean, generally, the numbers will be smaller too. So, it's a lower risk on both sides. We've got more active audiences with a lower cost to test it out. It always really frustrates me that it's still really hard for the most part for an independent podcaster to manage that monetization. Ad platforms, they've been improving, but it's still set up for big shows, big networks. And I think a lot of the sponsorship matching services and ad marketplaces, they've got a lot of way to go to really improve and make it as easy as buying a Facebook ad or a Google ad. But I think this year, with that move towards maybe lower shows, lower audience shows, more independent podcasters, it'll serve to persuade or motivate or even empower new companies that will really improve those matching services, those ad marketplaces. It'll serve that growing independent but professional sector of podcasters. We need services that will track it, start to end, assist in the management of the whole thing, much more self-service. I know people must be working on this, and I think we'll see a lot more of that come out this year. Number 3. I've gone backwards again. There we go. Community and listener engagement. That ties in. The previous one ties in. This is my third trend. I mean, this is not new by any means, but I think it's one that we underuse in podcasting and will grow a lot this coming year, much more compared to the last few years. It's all about community and listener engagement. I mean, you saw that stat in our census. 82% of podcasters would love to get more feedback from their listeners. Because, again, as powerful as podcasting is, it's still heavily one way. We've really not cracked that feedback, that engagement mechanism. Now, I think this year and beyond, listening apps will concentrate much more on feedback mechanisms. They'll enable conversations much more easily. I think on the other hand as well, the other side, I think hosting platforms will work to build more of this into the podcast websites they offer, and developments in podcast standards. They might even allow us to start including this in their RSS feeds, which will be amazing. I mean, one example that could work for both of those providers is an open standard like ActivityPub. It exists. Something exists to be able to power this. Some great folks in the Podcast 2.0 community have proposed ideas here, like a tag called Podcast Social, which better ties social networking apps to your podcast. Or there's a podcast comments tag under discussion too, which would be more like YouTube comments, but decentralized. And so you could view or contribute to them wherever you listen to podcasts, not listen to just one place like YouTube or the like. And some of this is already in action and working. John Spurlock set up a minimal ActivityPub server called MiniPub and a big guide on how to use it. So it's easier than ever to start experimenting with this out there if you're building podcast software. Of course, it could be tackled in part by new entrants to the space, like YouTube, of course, if they ever fully jump in. But centralized comments like that, they'll never be as effective, splitting your community into all these little tiny factions all over the internet. So I hope we see standards around this develop really well during 2023, which means we can have one community, one conversation per podcast. And as a listener, you can take part in it however suits you, wherever you are. Okay, final one. I can't not mention AI. Positives and negatives, absolutely. But what we've seen develop during 2022, even more so just in the last few months, I won't spend too much time on this, but I think it is worth jumping into just a little bit. The main thing I think we'll see here is using tools like ChatGPT to create a better overall experience for listeners, and all to the benefit of the indie podcaster. I think we can make it a huge benefit for us as podcasters. There's always going to be doom and gloom. There's always going to be things around whether it's going to take over from humans in many ways, jobs will be lost. But I think that the power of podcasting has always been the humanity, the personality, the transparency, the real person behind the mic. That's why I think we're the last people that would ever be negatively affected by AI, by something like ChatGPT. And on the other hand, I think it can be a real boon to a lot of things. So we're always used to, as independent podcasters, we're always used to doing more with less. So with the help of AI, we can do so much more to easily create, great written resources that go along with our audio. You saw that stat back there about show notes, people really struggling with show notes. Well, AI can help us create them in a really simple, easy way. All of that helps with accessibility, helps with discoverability, being more Google friendly, and it helps with listener loyalty because you offer up all those great ways to revisit content, skim summaries, get more from everything you listen to. I just think it'll help great content creators reach more potential listeners in other ways too. Like suggesting great, compelling titles that really draw people in. It can help you write those and make them even more compelling. We're good talkers, but we're not necessarily good writers. So getting help with those episode titles, with those summaries, with those descriptions could really change how we can market our shows. And there are potential downsides, of course. The worry that it dumbs down content. People will outsource so much to AI or it replaces some of the work we do. But I think we can try to figure that balance out. And as independent podcasters, we can use it to really help us do more with less and plug any skill gaps that we have. All right, that is the trends that I see coming up in 2023 that I'd love to hear your thoughts on. So that's me going through that 30 minutes. That gives us 20 minutes to have a bit of a discussion. So I'd love to see. So yeah, Sean, have we seen many questions and answers come in?
We've got some excellent questions coming in, and if you haven't had an opportunity just yet, first, thanks, Colin, for walking through that. I've been sort of sunk into the data for so long that I've been looking at it in my own little bubble, and it's nice to see someone else's perspective on it. So thanks for putting together such great detail on that. We've got some excellent questions coming in the Q&A, and if you haven't had a chance to pop over there and vote up the different questions, have a look, because group input is really useful to make sure that we're prioritizing what you guys all want to hear about. But in the meantime, I'll just start selecting some questions that have risen to the top and are actually quite interesting. And I think Colin's insight on these would be really great to hear. So we recently attended a podcast conference that showed most podcasts don't make it to 10 episodes and quickly fail. Few podcasts make enough money to be sustainable. How do we turn around this industry problem?
Very good question. I mean, I think a big part of it is that monetization aspect, how we make it easier for independent podcasters to match with independent businesses. This is the thing. Like we've long, if anyone's listened to podcasts, many of you out there will listen to podcasts, I'm sure. In fact, all of you, I'm certain, listen to a lot of podcasts. So you probably know all of the standard tropes of the people that advertise in podcasting. I mean, how many times have you heard a Casper Mattresses advert or an Athletic Greens advert? There's I remember seeing a stat around this. There's something it was something ludicrously small, like 12 or 13 advertisers that make up 99% of the adverts in the podcast industry. It's crazy. So we've got this problem whereby it's hard to find shows to advertise with unless you're a big network, unless you have a huge audience. It's hard to match it. It's hard to monitor it. It's hard to create those adverts because we put a lot more work into our adverts than most people. It's all host read. It's all custom made, which is the power of it. So there's so much work to be done to make better systems that can match make small shows, a few thousand and less, because that's kind of the limit right now for sponsorship. You have to be 2,000 or 3,000 listeners per episode or higher to even get considered by big ad networks. So what if you're in the massive amount of people under 1,000 listens? You just don't get a look in. So we need those systems that can match those people with small companies that are happy they need the lower budget. I think that's coming. There's a few systems out there that work okay just now. They'll get better. They'll be improved this coming year, I'm sure, as people flock to them to try and find lower cost advertising solutions. So I think that's a huge part of it, certainly.
Thanks very much for that, Colin. And additionally, it's sort of on a side note, we've got some great talks coming up later on today that focus on creating mini podcasts and sort of accessible steps for the beginner podcasters to start creating their shows and in a practical way that is manageable for you as well. So reaching that 10 episode and beyond can be a little bit more attainable for those early beginners.
It's a great point, actually, around making it easier to create the shows as well, in terms of that. That's why a lot of people pod fade, as we call it, whereby you just give up because it's actually just too hard work. And you don't need to be making a lot of money if it's much easier to make your podcast. Or actually, a lot of people don't need to be making money to run a podcast at all because they just love talking about what they talk about. But when it becomes almost a part-time job and it takes you a day or two to produce that show, that's when the problems creep in. So there's a lot we try to do on the podcast host and with Alitu to try and help people figure out better workflows, to make it simpler, to give editing tips that cut down the time you need to spend on it, or even just empower people to actually do a bit less and be a bit less perfectionist. And you can still create really good quality audio with less editing, especially if you automate it with some of the great tools that are out there to make podcasts.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you very much, Colin. We've got some other interesting questions, and this one is sort of a continuation of some of the comments that you were making on providing a space for these smaller podcasts. And I think this is something that is clearly quite important to our attendees today. Is there any further insight you can offer for this particular question and discoverability for those who might just be starting out when their podcast is quite niche?
Yeah, sure. It's always a big question as well. Yeah, how do you get found in the first place? I think this coming year again, the possibility of more easily creating written content will go a long way towards that. I think it's something that many podcasters very much underuse is the written content that goes with it. If you create like a really niche podcast on something very esoteric, like a little corner of an industry, then you're not going to have much competition there. And if you manage to create, so say you create 10 episodes on blue widgets, and you manage to create 10 articles that go along with that, written articles that go along with that, those fans, the people that are into that niche, that industry, they'll be typing those into Google, and they won't necessarily find your podcast that way. But if you have those show notes that go along with it, that is a huge way to be found. They find the article, but they spot the player in the article, and then they play it, and then they start listening to your podcast and start subscribing in that way. So I think the chance of making that written content much more easily, either through just plain transcription tools, which are becoming cheaper and cheaper, more and more accessible, or through things like ChatGPT, like AI, that can help you summarize text and republish it, repurpose it to put it out there to create some written materials. I think that is a huge discoverability boon for us, because that has long been the problem with audio. It's not discoverable because the search engines find it very hard to index. They can't listen to us very easily and then index it. So that's a big part of it. So I think that will make a big, big difference.
Thanks, Colin. A continuation on that, we've got some really great talks from a couple of our key speakers today, focusing on marketing, a bit in the SEO space, a bit just general marketing advice. So certainly, Jorn, sorry if I'm butchering your name, there will be plenty of insight that you can gather from those follow-up workshops. So keep your eye out for those as well. Okay, we've got a little bit more time. We'll take a few more questions if we can. What's the best way to get feedback from a podcast audience? I have a lot of downloads, but have a hard time finding out what listeners think about the show.
Okay, yeah, I've got a couple of thoughts on this that I think often work. I think people try all the obvious ways. Generally, they say, right, so give me some feedback. I'd love to hear what you think of the show. Email me at blah, 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 or contact me on Twitter at blah, 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 or go and fill out my survey. It's over here at whatever. The trouble is most people don't get much feedback from that because they're just not specific enough. The way that we've found is the most effective way to get that kind of feedback is to be super specific. Make it really easy and quite compelling for the person to go and do it. And when I say easy, I don't mean the tool, I mean the question. So let's say, Podcraft is our show. Podcraft is the show that Matthew and I run about podcasting, how to run a podcast. On that show, we don't say at the end of the show, give us some feedback, like what do you want to hear about in podcasting? We say something very specific related to the show. We say, right, next episode, we're going to talk about microphones. What is the worst microphone you've ever owned? And then leave it at that. It's quite a compelling, interesting question. Or it could be something like, what is your biggest problem when it comes to using your microphone? Or what's your biggest question when it comes to choosing a microphone? Either way, it's really specific. And therefore, there's no real thought required. There's no kind of, what do I want to tell them about podcasting in general? It's actually spurring it in their head what they want to get feedback on. And I think if you do that, we've found if you do that, it doesn't matter the feedback mechanism, whether you ask people to email you, whether you ask them to tweet you, whether you ask them to do whatever method it is, you get way more feedback if you're that specific. That's a kind of example around topics, but equally it could be like format or improving the show as well. Great things to get feedback on, like say, right, so I've been running an interview show so far. Get in touch and let me know if I was to run some solo episodes, how would you like that? Do you like solo episodes? How long would you want them to be? Just get really specific. That's the way to get the feedback from me. We have run surveys. I think surveys are a really good, valuable way to do it. You need to keep them short though, and you need to give some incentive. So either you can run a little competition, can be a really nice thing. Actually, do you know, like a $20 Amazon voucher can actually be really effective, like something quite low value. Or for us, a microphone, a $50 microphone actually got a really good response for us with a survey a little while back. You say, go to this survey, enter, it only takes 2 minutes, and I'll draw out a name out of the hat and send that person a microphone at the end of the day. So those kind of incentives can work really nicely as well. So I hope that's a couple of tips, but yeah, I'm glad you're thinking about it, Keith. It's a really important thing to do, to keep chasing that feedback and try and get more of it. And like I said, in the trends part, people are working on this. There's definitely some ways that are coming that might enable us as podcasters to get comments, to get discussion, to get all of that kind of engagement the same way that you get on YouTube or on a blog, that type of thing. It might be coming soon, hopefully within the next 12 months.
Thanks very much for your question, Keith, and thanks for the answer as well, Colin. I think we've got time for just maybe a couple more. And I just asked Marika to share a little bit more on what she is referring to in terms of networks. And
guessing she'll be talking about a podcast network.
Yeah.
That'd be the comment. That'd be the
community. And yeah, please share your thoughts on this, Colin. Let's talk about podcast networks. What are they for, and are they worth the investment?
Yeah, sure. A podcast network, I mean, are they worth the time and the money? Well, let's go into it. A podcast network generally is a group of shows. It'll be run by one organization, whether that's an individual, a person, or whether it's a business. And they'll have a brand for the network. And then they'll have a suite of shows, whether it's, just a few shows or whether it's literally hundreds of podcast shows under that umbrella. Often you'll be able to see this by the podcast artwork has a little logo of the network in the bottom right of the artwork. So you'll see that show is part of that network. The point of a network generally is to try and create, pardon the pun, network effects so that those shows can all work together. So I talked earlier about the fact that if you're a really small show, you've only got 500 or 1,000 listeners. Well, that's not that small. I mean, 1,000 listeners is a good number of listeners, but even 1,000 listeners is too small generally to be considered by advertising marketplaces, by sponsorship kind of networks, that type of stuff. But if you have a network of podcasts, all with 1,000 listeners each, suddenly you might have 10 shows, and that's 10,000 listeners. And therefore, an advertiser, so us as advertisers, we could say, like, we want to go and advertise Alitu. We'd go to that network and say, right, we're going to buy an advert on all 10 of the shows within that network. And that's managed then by the network. The benefit you get as a podcaster is that you then get those sponsorship dollars, because they can come to you via the network. The network works to sell, because the point of a network is that they'll help you grow your show through advertising you on the other podcasts, by advertising you as part of the network. But equally, they'll promote, they'll sell ad space on your show as well. They give you other support as well, of course, like they can provide some of the legal stuff, like maybe contracts and things like that, or give you help on how to put together adverts, how to put together that sponsor slot, how to read it, all that kind of stuff. So they are really worthwhile if you are a podcaster that wants to take your show seriously. You want to grow your audience, you want to, get more sponsorship, and you don't mind giving up a bit of control. Because, of course, that's the downside. That's where it moves to. If you join a network, they have control over your show in a way. They maybe can't tell you the kind of content that you create, although some could. So when you're joining the network, you need to see what the conditions are. And the important thing is you need to see what the conditions are if you want to leave, because you don't want to sign over your show to the network forever, and so you never can leave again. So the best networks will let you join. The contract will say that you still own your show. They'll take, 30% of the sponsorship money. They'll help you grow, but they'll tie you in for a certain amount of time. But if you want to leave, you can take the show and you can go elsewhere. But on the other hand, other networks maybe help you grow better, give you more sponsorship money, but you have to give over a bit more control. So it's very much a balance of how much you want to give up compared to how much you want to get. And certainly I can tell you that, like I said, as a smaller show, it's hard to get those sponsorships. There's a fair bit of work goes into it. So if you can find a good network that supports you, that will do those sales for you, get you that sponsorship money so that you can concentrate on just making great content, then it could be a really good choice for you.
Excellent. We hope that answered your question, Marika. Certainly, I wouldn't have expected a better answer from anyone in the business. So thanks for that, Colin. We're going to, we were about to. Scott Edwards, we've had a request from him to ask a little bit about the census data, and in regards to that $1,000 spend. If you had that money to spend, what would you do with it? One of his questions was specifically, why didn't you include marketing in that budget? Now, for us, that was a specific decision to make sure that that was excluded. But he was also interested in the process of delivering ads and paid ads for your podcast. Now, I know that this is something that you've done in the past on your different podcasts, Colin. Sure. Advertising with other podcasts or through Facebook or different avenues. Is that something that you could address for us?
Yeah. So what different ways to advertise, what the best methods
different
are,
ways,
stuff.
Exactly. And perhaps some of the caveats to investing in that early on.
Yeah, sure. There's some of the good early ways to advertise potentially are something that people miss often are the listening apps. So a lot of the listening apps offer the opportunity to advertise. Sometimes it's maybe a later stage thing. I'm just thinking this through as I talk. So maybe a later stage thing because it tends to be a minimum budget of maybe a few $100 up to even $1,000. But as an example, Overcast is one of the more popular listening apps. And in there, you can choose a sector. You can say, if I run a technology podcast, I can pay a few $100s, might even be up to $1,000 for that sector, for example. And then they'll show, if people search in the technology sector in the listening app, they'll show your podcast in a little bar at the bottom of the listening app. Now, obviously, this is a great place to advertise as a podcast because people can click it and they're already listening to a podcast. They're already wanting to find more podcasts because they're searching. And if they click it, they can subscribe straight from there because they're already in their listening app. So that is one place that if you do have budget to advertise is a really nice way to go. The lower budget, the maybe experimental way to get into it is much more with social network advertising. So obviously, depends on your taste for the social networks these days, but Facebook ads still do work if you're up for using them. You find communities, you can target people that have certain interests. So depending on what kind of show you run, you can even budget only like a few dollars a day just to get in front of a few dozen people every day, for example, and potentially grow more interest around your podcast that way. Twitter does the same, Reddit, all the other networks you can advertise into. LinkedIn as well. LinkedIn seems to be getting a bit of a resurgence these days, thanks to all the issues with the other ones. So that's two levels, I would say, for advertising, the kind of paid ads on the social networks up to looking at the listener apps as well. What I would say, you mentioned caveats there, Sean, around getting into it. Certainly, I would argue that this is a later stage thing for most people because you want to make sure that if you're starting to invest money, spend money, that your content's at a good state. And often it takes us as podcasters, particularly independent podcasters, a little while to find our voice, to find our niche, to find our real positioning. So maybe you're 10, 20 episodes in, you've started to really see where your space is, your niche is, what people like in your show. And once you get to that point, that's where it's really a good idea to start doubling down on all the marketing methods. And maybe advertising is one of them.
So we're going to close this session. We'll end it up. Thank you very much to Colin for first delivering all of the census data and then answering all of these very thoughtful questions.